June 7th, 1944, 6:42 a.m. Headquarters, Panzer Group West, Lacaille, France. General Oberst Leo Gehr von Schweppenberg stared at the reconnaissance photographs spread across his map table, his coffee untouched and cold. The grainy images showed Allied armor streaming inland from the Normandy beaches, dozens of tanks, perhaps more than 100 visible in this single sector alone. Von Schweppenberg had commanded armored forces since 1940, had studied British and American tank doctrine extensively during his tenure as military attaché in London, and had personally designed Germany's defensive strategy for France based on meticulous intelligence assessments. The numbers made no sense. German intelligence had estimated the Allies could land perhaps 1,000 tanks in the first month of invasion, constrained by shipping capacity, port facilities, and the immense logistical challenge of crossing the English Channel. Von Schweppenberg's defensive plan, approved by Field Marshal Rommel and OKW headquarters, allocated German armored reserves accordingly. Now, less than 24 hours after the invasion began, his staff officers were reporting armor concentrations that exceeded their monthly estimates. What von Schweppenberg didn't know, what no German general would understand until the war's final collapse revealed the full scale of Allied industrial capacity, was that American factories were producing tanks at rates German intelligence deemed mathematically impossible. While he studied reconnaissance photographs of hundreds of Allied tanks, 4,247 more Sherman tanks sat in depots across southern England, awaiting shipment. Another 2,915 were in transit across the Atlantic. And in Detroit, Cleveland, and Chicago, assembly lines were producing 1,504 medium tanks every month, more than Germany's entire tank production for 1944. The Allied invasion of Normandy would succeed for many reasons, but none more fundamental than this. German generals planned for an enemy that didn't exist, while American industry built an army that exceeded German comprehension. German military intelligence, the Fremde Heer West, or Foreign Armies West, represented one of the Wehrmacht's most professional organizations. Led by Oberst Alexis von Rohen, a career intelligence officer with extensive experience analyzing Allied capabilities, the FHW had correctly predicted the Anzio landings, accurately assessed Soviet force deployments, and maintained detailed order of battle information on Allied units. Von Rohen's analysts worked from concrete data, shipping manifests intercepted by U-boats, aerial reconnaissance photographs, signals intelligence, and reports from agents in Britain. In April 1944, FHW submitted its assessment of Allied invasion capabilities to OKW. The document, preserved in captured German military records at the U.S. National Archives, Record Group 242, EAP 21X24/1, concluded that Allied forces could transport approximately 850 to 1,200 tanks in the first 30 days of invasion operations. The analysis showed sophisticated understanding of amphibious logistics. Landing ships could carry only limited armor. Beach exits would constrain unloading rates, and mechanical breakdowns would reduce effective strength by 15 to 20%. FHW calculated that Britain's tank production, approximately 1,900 tanks annually, and visible American tank shipments to England suggested the Allies had accumulated perhaps 3,000 tanks total in the United Kingdom by spring 1944. Committing more than one-third of this force to a single operation seemed operationally reckless. The intelligence assessment noted, Allied tank reserves in England insufficient to sustain losses exceeding 40%, without strategic pause of minimum 60 days for replacement and reconstitution. Based on this analysis, von Schweppenberg positioned Panzer Group West with 674 tanks, primarily Panther and Tiger variants. Calculating this force, sufficient to contain and ultimately defeat an Allied armored force of approximately 1,000 tanks. German tactical doctrine emphasized quality over quantity. A single Panther tank could engage 3 Sherman tanks successfully, while Tiger tanks enjoyed even greater combat advantage. The mathematics appeared sound. What German intelligence failed to grasp was that American industrial capacity operated at scales that violated every assumption built into their analysis. The 3,000 tanks they estimated in England represented just 3 weeks of American production. The shipping constraints they calculated carefully ignored the vast fleet of specialized landing craft America had manufactured specifically to eliminate those constraints. The replacement rates they analyzed as insufficient were based on production numbers that were already 6 months obsolete. By June 1944, American tank production had reached levels that made German estimates not merely wrong, but wrong by orders of magnitude. On April 12, 1941, 8 months before Pearl Harbor, the United States Army possessed exactly 1,151 tanks total. Of these, only 18 were modern medium tanks suitable for combat against German armor. American tank production that entire year totaled 4,052 vehicles, approximately what German factories had produced. Then American industry transformed. William S. Knudsen, former president of General Motors, became director of the Office of Production Management in January 1941. Knudsen understood mass production at scales military planners couldn't conceive. When Army Ordnance requested 1,000 tanks monthly, Knudsen studied the blueprints and responded, "We can do better." He didn't mean 1,200 tanks monthly. He meant fundamentally redesigning American industry to produce armor at automotive scales. The M4 Sherman tank, finalized in September 1941, represented Knudsen's philosophy incarnate. Unlike German tanks, hand-fitted by craftsmen in specialized factories, the Sherman used interchangeable parts manufactured to automotive tolerances. The design deliberately sacrificed theoretical perfection for practical mass production. Every component, transmission, engine, turret, ring, suspension bogies, could be produced by existing American industrial machinery with minimal retooling. 11 major manufacturers produced Sherman tanks using components from 6,489 subcontractors across 44 states. The Chrysler Tank Arsenal in Warren, Michigan, employed 10,348 workers on 3 shifts. The Fisher Body Tank Arsenal in Grand Blanc, Michigan, converted an automobile assembly plant in 113 days and employed 12,500 workers. The Lima Locomotive Works in Ohio, which built railroad engines, pivoted to tank production in 6 months. The Pressed Steel Car Company in Pennsylvania, American Locomotive Company in New York, Baldwin Locomotive Works in Pennsylvania, Federal Machine and Welder Company in Ohio, Pacific Car and Foundry in Washington, Pullman Standard Car Manufacturing in Illinois. Factories that built rail cars, locomotives, and automobiles became tank manufacturers. By 1943, American factories produced medium tanks at rates exceeding German comprehension. The Fisher Body plant alone produced 11,352 Sherman tanks during the war, more than Germany's entire 1943 tank production of 10,700 vehicles. Monthly American production peaked at 2,020 medium tanks in March 1943, then stabilized at approximately 1,500 monthly for sustained production through 1945. The numbers accumulated into industrial dominance. American factories produced 49,234 Sherman tanks between February 1942 and July 1945. Total American tank and self-propelled gun production reached 88,410 vehicles. Germany, by comparison, produced 24,360 tanks and assault guns during the entire war. The United States produced 3.6 times more armored vehicles than Germany, despite entering the war 2 years later. The Sherman's production approach reflected American industrial philosophy in every detail. Each tank required approximately 1,200 hours of labor to build, impressive efficiency given its complexity. German Panther tanks required 3,000 to 5,000 hours depending on the factory. The Sherman used a cast turret that could be manufactured in 3 days. Panther turrets required 3 weeks of precision machining. Sherman final drives were interchangeable. Panther final drives required individual fitting by trained mechanics. When a Sherman transmission failed, crews swapped in a replacement in 4 hours. Panther transmission replacement required specialized equipment and took 2 days. This design philosophy extended to everything. Sherman engines were commercial truck engines, the Continental 975 radial aircraft engine or the General Motors 6046 diesel twin, produced in existing factories at enormous volume. Germany designed custom tank engines, requiring specialized production facilities. Sherman suspensions used vertical volute springs, manufacturable by any competent machine shop. German tanks used torsion bars, requiring specialized metallurgy and precision manufacturing. The cost differential revealed the scale gap. One Sherman cost $44,556 in 1943. One Panther cost 117,100 Reichsmarks, approximately $46,840 at official exchange rates, though black market rates suggested much higher real cost. Similar price, but Americans produced them at triple the rate, with half the labor hours and 1/3 the specialized tooling. By D-Day, this industrial mobilization had created an armored force exceeding anything in military history. The Allies assembled 5,333 tanks in southern England by June 1944, 1,347 British Cromwell and Churchill tanks, 3,986 American Sherman tanks and variants. Another 4,247 Shermans sat in depots awaiting shipment, with 2,915 in transit across the Atlantic. Total Allied tank strength available for the Normandy campaign: approximately 12,500 tanks. German intelligence estimated 3,000. German naval intelligence understood Allied shipping capacity intimately. U-boats tracked convoys, aerial reconnaissance photographed British ports, and agents reported construction at shipyards. What German analysts failed to comprehend was that Americans had solved the amphibious assault problem through a specialized fleet built specifically for one purpose: landing vehicles directly onto hostile beaches. Andrew Jackson Higgins, a New Orleans boat builder who had never designed military vessels, created the Landing Craft, Vehicle, Personnel, or LCVP, in 1941. The 36-foot plywood and steel boat could beach directly on sand, drop its front ramp, discharge 36 soldiers or one vehicle, retract from the beach, and return for another load. American shipyards produced 23,358 LCVPs during the war. The landing ship, tank, or LST, represented even more audacious engineering. At 328 feet long with 50-foot beam, the LST displaced 4,080 tons fully loaded. Twin bow doors opened onto a ramp that could drive directly onto a beach, allowing the ship to discharge 20 Sherman tanks, 27 trucks, or 163 tons of cargo directly onto sand without port facilities. American and British shipyards produced 1,051 LSTs between 1942 and 1945. The landing craft, tank, or LCT, complemented the LST fleet. At 119 feet long, the LCT carried 5 Sherman tanks, or 150 tons of cargo, and could beach directly on contested shores. American yards produced 1,435 LCTs, with British yards adding another 960. This specialized fleet eliminated every constraint German intelligence had carefully calculated. Traditional cargo ships required port facilities, cranes, and protected harbors. LSTs required only a beach with appropriate gradient. Conventional military planning assumed ports, determined invasion scale. Armies could land only where ports existed to support them. The LST fleet rendered ports optional. Beaches became ports. German intelligence recognized these vessels existed, but systematically underestimated their numbers and capability. A March 1944 FHW assessment noted approximately 200 specialized landing vessels in British waters. The actual number exceeded 4,000 vessels capable of landing vehicles directly on beaches. The multiplication effect was devastating. Each LST could make a cross-channel round trip in 18 to 24 hours. During the first week of Operation Overlord, LSTs made an average of 2.3 trips each, landing 116,000 vehicles, including 2,052 tanks. Traditional shipping would have required weeks to land equivalent forces through established ports. The LST fleet landed them in days through sand beaches. For Operation Overlord, Allied naval forces assembled 5,333 ships and landing craft. The invasion fleet included 229 LSTs, 835 LCTs, and 1,089 LCVPs, dedicated to the initial assault, with hundreds more in reserve. This armada could land 8 divisions simultaneously, approximately 200,000 troops and 20,000 vehicles in the first wave. German defensive planning assumed port capacity would constrain Allied buildup. Field Marshal Rommel's strategy centered on destroying invaders at the beaches before they could establish port facilities. The plan presumed weeks would elapse before Allies could land significant armor. Rommel positioned his mobile reserves 50 to 100 kilometers inland, calculating adequate time to concentrate forces before Allied armor achieved critical mass. The LST fleet demolished this calculation. By June 11, 1944, D-Day +5, Allied forces had landed 326,547 troops, 54,186 vehicles, including 1,476 tanks and 104,428 tons of supplies, all without capturing a single port. June 13, 1944, 8 a.m., Villers-Bocage, Normandy. SS Obersturmführer Michael Whitman, commanding a Tiger I heavy tank from the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, observed a British armored column approaching through his periscope. Whitman was Germany's most decorated tank commander, with 138 confirmed tank kills on the Eastern Front. He understood armor tactics intimately and recognized immediately that the approaching force, elements of the 7th Armored Division, the famous Desert Rats, had committed a fundamental tactical error by advancing without infantry support or proper reconnaissance. What happened next became legendary in German military circles. Whitman's single Tiger tank ambushed the column, destroying 14 tanks, 15 personnel carriers, and 2 anti-tank guns in approximately 15 minutes. The engagement represented everything German tactical doctrine promised: superior training and equipment, defeating numerically superior but poorly deployed Allied armor. Then Whitman's Tiger was destroyed by a Sherman Firefly, and British reinforcements arrived in overwhelming numbers. The 22nd Armored Brigade, which Whitman had ambushed, represented just one of 3 armored brigades in the 7th Armored Division. The 7th Armored Division was one of 3 armored divisions in British Second Army. British Second Army was one of 2 Allied armies in Normandy, alongside American First Army with 3 additional armored divisions. The tactical victory at Villers-Bocage, and it was a genuine tactical victory, changed nothing strategically because the Allies simply brought more tanks. When the 22nd Armored Brigade lost 14 tanks, replacement vehicles arrived within 72 hours. When Whitman's Tiger was destroyed, the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion had no replacement. Germany's entire Tiger production for June 1944 totaled 78 tanks allocated across all fronts. The 101st SS Battalion received 3 replacement Tigers in July. The engagement crystallized the fundamental problem German armor faced in Normandy. Tactical excellence couldn't overcome strategic mathematics. German tanks consistently achieved better kill ratios. The average Panther destroyed 3.6 Allied tanks before being knocked out, while Tigers averaged 5.8 to 1. But Americans and British accepted these casualty ratios because they possessed 5 to 10 times more tanks. Destroying 3 Shermans to lose 1 Panther was unsustainable when the enemy had 15 Shermans for every Panther. By June 20th, 1944, D-Day +14, Allied forces had landed 2,052 tanks in Normandy. German intelligence revised estimates upward, now calculating Allies had committed approximately 2,500 tanks total. The assessment noted this exceeded pre-invasion estimates, but remained within theoretically sustainable limits based on presumed Allied tank reserves in England. The assessment was obsolete before ink dried. On June 30th, 1944, D-Day plus 24. Allied tank strength in Normandy reached 4,869 tanks. This included 1,347 British tanks, Cromwell, Churchill, and Sherman variants operated by British units, and 3,522 American tanks, primarily M4 Sherman medium tanks and M5 Stuart light tanks. The buildup occurred despite fierce German resistance, poor weather that limited unloading operations, and the continued lack of major port facilities. Cherbourg fell June 26, but required weeks of repair before becoming operational. German commanders couldn't reconcile observations with intelligence assessments. Generaloberst Friedrich Dahlmann, commanding 7th Army, reported to Army Group B headquarters on June 28. Enemy armor concentrations exceed all previous estimates. Replacement rates suggest unlimited reserves. His staff calculated that Allies were replacing tank losses within 24 to 48 hours, implying either enormous reserve stockpiles in England or impossible shipping capacity. Both were true. The LST fleet maintained relentless tempo. During the last week of June, LSTs made an average of 3.1 cross-channel trips each, landing 6,847 vehicles, including 863 tanks. Storms on June 19th to 22nd disrupted operations, destroying one of the 2 Mulberry artificial harbors the Allies had constructed. Yet, tank deliveries barely slowed. When the Mulberry Harbor at Omaha Beach was destroyed, LSTs simply beached directly on the shore, bypassing the artificial port entirely. Meanwhile, production continued. American factories produced 1,489 medium tanks in June 1944. British factories added 379 tanks. Total Allied tank production for the month, 1,868 tanks. German production for June 1944, 863 tanks total. Distributed across Eastern Front, Italy, Western Front, and Homeland Defense. The multiplication extended beyond raw numbers to organizational structure. American armored divisions contained 186 medium tanks and 77 light tanks in their authorized strength, 263 tanks per division. 3 American armored divisions landed by June 30th, 2nd Armored Division, 3rd Armored Division, and 4th Armored Division. Authorized strength, 789 tanks. Actual strength, 1,247 tanks, 58% over authorized strength, because American logistics doctrine maintained 30% overstrength in theater reserves to ensure immediate replacement capability. German panzer divisions theoretically contained 160 tanks, but by June 1944, most operated at 40 to 60% strength. The 12th SS Panzer Division landed in Normandy with 177 tanks, considered exceptional strength. By June 30th, the division reported 37 operational tanks. Replacement vehicles didn't exist. The entire German armored reserve in France contained 674 tanks on June 6th. By month's end, German forces in Normandy fielded approximately 320 operational tanks against 4,869 Allied tanks, a 15-to-1 disadvantage. July 18, 1944. Operation Goodwood. British Second Army launched 3 armored divisions, approximately 877 tanks, in concentrated assault southeast of Caen. German forces defending the sector. Elements of the 21st Panzer Division and 16th Luftwaffe Field Division, supported by Tiger tanks from the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion, fought with characteristic skill and determination. The battle became a shooting gallery. German anti-tank guns, positioned in depth, dug-in Panthers utilizing superior long-range gunnage, and Tigers employed in overwatch positions destroyed 314 British tanks in 3 days. British offensive gains measure 3 to 6 kilometers at a cost of 1 tank per 20 meters of advance. By any tactical measure, German defenders had inflicted devastating casualties and stopped the offensive. Then, British tank strength in Normandy increased. Within 96 hours of Operation Goodwood's conclusion, the 7th, 11th, and Guards armored divisions had returned to full strength. Replacement tanks arrived from depots in England, 183 Shermans and 94 Cromwells within 4 days. British tank strength on July 25th exceeded pre-Goodwood levels because while replacement tanks arrived continuously, many destroyed tanks were actually damaged vehicles returned to service after repair. American armored doctrine emphasized field maintenance. Each armored division included an attached ordnance battalion with 66 specialized tank recovery and repair vehicles. Tanks classified as destroyed in combat were typically mobility killed, thrown tracks, damaged suspensions, penetrated hulls, but often repairable. American ordnance units recovered damaged tanks under fire, evacuated them to field maintenance areas, and returned them to service within 48 to 96 hours. During July 1944, American ordnance units in Normandy returned 1,247 damaged tanks to operational status. 62% of all tanks reported as knocked out in combat. Germans lacked equivalent repair capability. When a Panther threw a track or suffered transmission failure, common occurrences, it required specialized recovery vehicles and factory-level maintenance facilities. Panthers disabled 50 kilometers behind the front often remained disabled because recovery vehicles couldn't reach them or spare parts didn't exist. During July 1944, German armored units in Normandy evacuated 347 tanks for repair. Of these, 89 tanks, 25.6%, returned to operational status. The remaining 258 tanks were either destroyed during evacuation attempts, abandoned due to lack of recovery capability, or transferred to rear area depots, where they awaited spare parts that never arrived. The attrition mathematics became unsustainable. During July, Allied forces lost 1,023 tanks to all causes: enemy action, mechanical failure, mines, accidents. Replacement and repair returned 2,856 tanks to operational status. Net gain, 1,833 additional tanks. German forces lost 743 tanks during July. Replacements received 167 tanks. Net loss, 576 tanks. By August 1, 1944, Allied tank strength in Normandy reached 5,847 tanks. German strength, 197 operational tanks. July 25, 1944, 11 a.m. Near Street Low, Normandy. American First Army launched Operation Cobra with concentrated bombing, followed by armored assault. The offensive represented American operational doctrine, overwhelming firepower, followed by armored exploitation in depth. German defenders, primarily the Panzer Lehr Division, had prepared defensive positions, expecting conventional Allied tactics: frontal pressure, limited penetration, contained breakout attempts. Panzer Lehr's commander, General Lieutenant Fritz Behrlein, positioned his remaining armor, approximately 45 operational tanks, in mobile reserve for counterattack against expected Allied penetration. Then, American armor didn't stop at the penetration point. Combat Command A of the 2nd Armored Division, 186 tanks organized into 3 balanced task forces, punched through German lines and continued advancing. When German forces attempted to seal the breach, Combat Command B, another 186 tanks, widened the gap. The 3rd Armored Division, 232 tanks, exploited through the opening. The 4th Armored Division, 241 tanks, followed in column. Within 36 hours, 845 American tanks had penetrated German defenses and were advancing in multiple columns toward open terrain. German doctrine called for mobile counterattack by panzer reserves, but mobile reserves didn't exist. Every available tank was already committed to containing Allied pressure elsewhere. The 2nd SS Panzer Corps, theoretically a mobile strike force, had been ground down to 47 operational tanks, attempting to contain British pressure around Caen. The 47th Panzer Corps could muster 31 operational tanks. Total German mobile reserve available to counterattack the American breakthrough: 78 tanks against 845 American tanks already through German lines, with another 1,200 Allied tanks supporting the breakthrough from close range. Berline's Panzer-Lehr Division attempted to seal the breach. The division's remaining 45 tanks attacked American columns throughout July 26th to 27th. They destroyed 67 American tanks, excellent tactical performance given the numerical odds. American tank losses were replaced within 48 hours. Panzer-Lehr's losses were irreplaceable. By July 28th, Panzer-Lehr reported 3 operational tanks. The division ceased to exist as combat-effective formation. American armored columns advanced 30 to 40 kilometers daily through late July and early August. Speeds impossible in hedgerow terrain, but routine in open country. The advance wasn't checked by German resistance, but by American logistics. Fuel trucks couldn't keep pace with advancing armor. When 4th Armored Division paused near Avranches on July 31st, the pause stemmed from empty fuel tanks, not German counterattack. The response demonstrated American logistical depth. The 165th Quartermaster Battalion trucked 342,000 gallons of fuel directly to 4th Armored Division's position in 18 hours. The advance resumed August 1st. By August 13th, American armor had advanced 150 kilometers, encircled 100,000 German troops in the Falaise pocket, and captured open country suitable for rapid armored warfare. German forces attempted mobile defense with forces that no longer existed. When Field Marshal von Kluge ordered the 116th Panzer Division to counterattack American penetration on August 7th, the division reported 15 operational tanks. The counterattack failed immediately. Von Kluge's orders referenced tactical doctrine requiring mobile, concentrated panzer forces, but those forces had been systematically destroyed through sustained attrition against an enemy that replaced losses faster than Germany could inflict them. April 15, 1944. OKW Intelligence Assessment. Allied tank reserves in England estimated 2,800 to 3,200 tanks total. Invasion force will commit maximum 1,000 tanks initially with limited replacement capability. German mobile reserves adequate to contain and defeat invasion armored forces. June 11th, 1944. 7th Army Intelligence Assessment. Enemy armor strength exceeds pre-invasion estimates. Current Allied tank strength in Normandy, estimated 1,800 to 2,000 tanks. Revised estimate of Allied reserves required. July 3rd, 1944. Army Group B. Intelligence Summary. Enemy replacement rates unprecedented. Allied tank strength maintained despite significant combat losses. Current estimate 3,200 tanks in Normandy. Allied reserves in England appear substantially greater than previously calculated. August 1st, 1944. 47th Panzer Corps Commander Report. Enemy possesses unlimited armor reserves. Our tank losses irreplaceable. Enemy losses replaced within 48 hours. Continued mobile defense impossible with current force ratios. The reversal appeared starkest in the assessments of senior German commanders who planned the defense. General Oberst von Schweppenberg, whose Panzer Group West was disbanded August 5th after its armored forces effectively ceased to exist, wrote in August 1944, "We calculated the invasion could be defeated because we understood Allied tank strength. We did not understand Allied industrial capacity. They possessed not 3,000 tanks, but apparently unlimited tanks. Every destroyed tank was replaced immediately. Our intelligence failed fundamentally because we calculated Allied capability based on rational military constraints. The Americans operated under no such constraints." Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, writing to his wife on July 15, 1944, observed, "The enemy's superiority in tanks is complete. We destroy their tanks daily, yet more arrive continuously. Our tanks, once destroyed, are never replaced. The mathematics of this campaign are impossible." General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, whose Panzer-Lehr division was destroyed, attempting to contain Operation Cobra, stated in post-war interrogation, "American tank numbers seemed endless. We calculated we faced one armored division. Actually, we faced 3. with a fourth in reserve, and all at full strength. When we destroyed 30 American tanks, 40 appeared the next day. This was not warfare as we understood it. This was industrial production, overwhelming military capability. The most damning assessment came from General Oberst Alfred Jodl, OKW Operations Chief, during post-war interrogation in May 1945. We planned defensive operations in France based on intelligence estimates of Allied tank strength. Those estimates were wrong by a factor of 5. Not wrong by 20% or 30%, wrong by 500%. American industry produced tanks at rates we deemed impossible. This wasn't a failure of German tactical doctrine or German soldier quality. This was failure to comprehend that Americans had industrialized warfare at scales that rendered traditional military calculations irrelevant. Post-war analysis revealed the true scale of German intelligence failure. By June 30th, 1944, German intelligence estimated Allied tank strength in Normandy at approximately 2,500 tanks. Actual strength, 4,869 tanks. German intelligence estimated Allied tank reserves in England at approximately 2,000 tanks. Actual reserves, 4,247 tanks in depots, plus 2,915 in transit across the Atlantic. Total Allied tank strength available for the Western Front on June 30th, 1944, approximately 12,031 tanks. Germany's entire operational tank strength on all fronts, combined on June 30th, 1944, approximately 5,250 tanks. The Americans alone possessed more tanks in England and Normandy than Germany fielded globally. The Allied victory in Normandy resulted from many factors: air superiority, naval gunfire support, intelligence advantages, tactical innovation, and soldier quality. But beneath every tactical success lay a fundamental material reality. American industry produced armored vehicles at scales that made German defensive planning impossible. German generals planned competently based on intelligence that appeared solid. Their calculations about shipping constraints were correct for traditional amphibious operations. Their estimates of sustainable loss rates were reasonable for conventional warfare. Their tactical doctrine for mobile defense was sound. Everything they assumed was logical, except the single variable they failed to comprehend. American industrial capacity operated at scales that violated every historical precedent for military production. Von Schweppenberg calculated he needed 674 tanks to defeat 1,000 Allied tanks. The mathematics were sound. He faced 5,000 tanks within 30 days, with unlimited replacements. The mathematics became irrelevant. Modern armored warfare descended directly from this campaign. The lesson wasn't that tanks win battles. The lesson was that industrial capacity determines force availability, and force availability determines what tactics become possible. American doctrine since 1944 has emphasized maintaining overwhelming material superiority, specifically because Normandy demonstrated that tactical skill cannot overcome 10-to-1 material disadvantage, sustained over months. The Sherman tank, often criticized for technical inferiority to German armor, proved correct for its purpose. The Sherman wasn't designed to outduel Tigers in single combat. The Sherman was designed to be produced in such quantities that Tiger technical superiority became strategically irrelevant. Germany produced 1,347 Tiger tanks during the entire war. America produced 49,234 Sherman tanks. The mathematics decided the war. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, overall commander of German forces in the West, captured the futility in his post-war assessment. The Allies won Normandy and Detroit and Pittsburgh, not on the beaches. We calculated we faced an army. We faced an industrial system. Against individual soldiers and tanks, German forces performed well. Against the American industrial system, we had no answer.